Hello, and let's return to part 2 now of integumentary. We went through the slides that talk about the cells. We looked at the cancers, and now we're going to move on to the different layers of the skin and look at it in more detail. So we had said earlier that the most superficial layer of the skin is the epidermis. So if I had to delineate it here with my pen, I would show it's going down like this. It actually follows down here, and then it continues up like this. It went down a little bit there, and there we go. So all this above my green line there would be the epidermis. And that's, remember, where those stem cells are going to be producing new cells and pushing them up towards the surface. That's renewing a lot. But notice how there's no vessels. There's no little arteries and veins up at the top here. Oops. Okay. Dermis, then epi is around or above or superficial, and this is dermis, and then hypo is below the dermis, and that one is the one that's going to be categorized by all this fat here that you can see. So the fatty layer is all in the hypodermis, and then we're going to see muscle below that. But we're going to take those one at a time, because even though this epidermis here is a tiny layer, very small, we're still going to divide it into its component parts and go even smaller. Okay, so I'm going to break it down even more for you. Here we go. So this is the breakdown of the epidermis. So in green, I had, made my line like this, so you know what you're seeing there. Everything above here. But now, look, there are some distinct cells here. I'm going to start from the bottom. So the basal layer, stratum basale. This is the basal layer where those new cells are, where mitosis is going on. This is where we had an example of a cancer, right? It was on the basal cell carcinoma. So this is the very lower layer. The second layer here is called a stratum or layer spinosum. And the reason it's called spinosum is because these cells that here looked pretty, rectangular or square, as they migrate towards the surface, they get sort of spinier, like this. And by looking spinier, it was called stratum spinosum. Okay, it's the same cells, but they're sort of losing their shape. And notice that when they're up here, they're about totally flat. Okay, now the very top layer here is sort of a granular layer, the one that's going to stain with a darker color. And, excuse me, this very sensitive mouse. So this darker color, and then this very transparent color here. This very transparent that seems to often have two layers. Okay, so look, one layer dark pink, lighter pink, and then all this stuff, and then the basal bottom layer. So of these two top ones, the very top dark pink is stratum corneum, and then below it is sort of on the microscope, it looks very transparent, very see-through. So they called it stratum lucidum. And then there's the one that stains very dark. Okay, so let me tell you more about those. The layers of the epidermis, where the epidermis is about 0.1 millimeter. Is that crazy? So this whole thing here is about 0.1 millimeter. So in itself, it's just tiny. And now we're going to go to the stratum corneum. There's only about 30 layers of dead keratinized cells. So let me go back. Corneum up here, right? Just in there is the dead keratinized cells. Makes you waterproof. And I put this ruler here to show you that 0.1 millimeter. I mean, this is 1 millimeter here, and it's 0.1 millimeter. And this is about an inch to there. So it's very tiny. The stratum lucidum, which is the transparent see-through one, is really only on your palms or on the soles of your feet, and nowhere else. Okay, let me go back to the picture. So this lighter pink here, I changed my color of my pen, and I went to, let me go to red because it's pinkish. So this here right below it, right there, is lucidum, and it's only found on the soles of your feet or in your hands. Maybe it's for added cushioning. We don't know why that layer is there and not in other parts of your skin. 3 is stratum granulosum. The cells release a lipid mixture that's also going to be waterproofing. It's that layer in the picture that stains more darkly. Stratum spinosum, I explained to you, are spiny because these cells are dying, and it's really the biggest layer of all of them. And then the basal layer, which are the living, reproducing cells that are undergoing mitosis, dividing and pushing up through that epidermis. Okay, I'm going to go back to the picture so that you can see them all again. Corneum, lucidum, granulosum, most of it is going to be spinosum, and then the basal layer. All right, let's look at a few more pathologies now. The skin really is riddled in pathologies. So one of them is vitiligo. So this is something that we don't know why it happens. The etiology is unknown, we don't know. But somehow, either the melanocytes are dying, so it's either the death of the melanocyte, or sometimes the melanocytes are still alive, but they fail to produce melanin. And so then this individual here has some patches with no melanin, so the darkness is gone. And especially if it's on your face, it's sort of distressing because it's something that someone will notice right away, that there's a darker patch and a lighter patch on your face. So it's worrying, and yet there's very nothing you can do about it. That's vitiligo. People always ask me about albinism when this comes up, about being albino, and that's a genetic disorder. So I threw this slide in. If you had, for example, a carrier father, like on one of his chromosomes, he had the blue, right? And the mom also on one of her chromosomes had the gene here, but it's not dominant. So the mother would be a carrier but wouldn't have albinism, and neither would the dad. But there is a possibility if a child, here, this one, were to inherit blue from dad and blue from mom, right? He has a chance of inheriting the other one, but if he inherits those two, you would have an affected child that would be albino. Then these other two children inherited it just from one parent, so they're carriers, and this one inherited it from neither parent. So it's unaffected, not albino, and not a carrier. Anyhow, that's a genetic disorder, albinism. There are many pigments that are found in the skin. There's 2 forms of melanin. Okay, it's not just one thing. It's eumelanin and pheomelanin. So eumelanin is more predominant in darker skins, and pheomelanin is a more reddish color, yellow. It's found a lot in redheads. So we all have a combination of these, but some individuals have way more of one of the pigments, making their skin color in a different way. We not only have these pigments on our skin, but we have them in our hair, and in the weirdest places, like they found pigment in the brain and in the inner ear. So we think that maybe the inner ear, it's stopping sound, pigment that could actually block excessive sound, maybe. And we're not sure of these functions in the brain. I'm going to show you some color differences of skin that are temporary. It's vocabulary that we use in medicine for when someone is looking blue. You don't say, oh my gosh, it's blue, okay? We say the individual has cyanosis. and this is usually during low oxygen, and the hemoglobin takes on a different iridescence. It becomes more reddish violet, and the individual looks blue. So that's cyanosis. Erythema is something red, so if something's inflamed or warm or sunburned or you're furious, you would have erythema coloring. White coloring is when you are pale or pallor, when you have low blood flow to the skin in a certain area. Jaundice is yellow. So this happens with high levels of bilirubin. So in problems with the liver, it could be yellow, or a newborn child that hasn't yet found a way to break down that bilirubin and hasn't broken down that hemoglobin, and they look yellow, but that goes away. A hematoma, you know, is the bruise, blood that's spilled outside of a vessel. We talked about hematoma and a broken bone. And I'm going to stop this here for us to then, in the next slide, go down into the dermis. So this is all relating to the epidermis, what goes on in the very top layer of that skin. Okay, thanks for joining.